My name is Marie, and I'm pleased to introduce our speaker for today. This is Alice. Alice is a professor at Cambridge. Alice has been at Cambridge in the computer science department for the last 11 years. She worked her way up from a postdoc all the way to a professor. She is the Professor of Emergent Harms. At Cambridge, she runs the Cambridge Cybercrime Centre, which I hear we're going to learn about a little bit today. They took the so back in the day when I started doing research in the field, like every researcher collected their own data, and then once they stopped collecting data, they wrote a paper on it, and then they published the data. But it was disjointed. It was really hard to manage, and you had to know people, email them, and their data sets weren't that great, and they weren't connected. And so the brilliant idea of the Cambridge Cybercrime Centre is, what if one group was responsible for collecting the data and being a trove for data for everybody, and that way we have longitudinal data. We have it collected in a way that we can be sure that it's actually good data. And Alice is head of collecting that data and manages that. And it's also one of the things I love the most about Alice. I've known Alice since she started at Cambridge, and she's very good at thinking broadly about things. So she does a lot of work creating communities. She started a number of workshops in the field and collected other ones. She tends to be a person that gets to know every cybercrime researcher, and I would encourage you to get to know her and get to know her work if you are interested there. But I don't want to talk too much, so let's all give a big round of applause for Alice.
Thank you, Marie. That was a wonderful introduction. So I'm going to talk about trust in untrusted worlds, and this is particularly relevant when talking about cybercrime, because often cybercrime offenders need to work with each other. They need to trust each other, but they're offenders. They're inherently untrustworthy. Why would you trust somebody who is going out committing crimes and you're, potentially making yourself vulnerable to this person? So it's kind of a paradox. How does trust exist in these types of communities? How do people who need to work together in order to carry out complex cybercrimes actually have the ability to do this? How is trust actually earned? So I'm going to talk you through just a little bit of an introduction to begin with about what I mean when I talk about cybercrime places. So I'm talking about things like places, forums and marketplaces, which are used for a variety of different purposes. So a lot of times people think about these as places where products and services are advertised. You could be a place where you might hire a bridge service for non-service tax, or malware as a service, or buy malware itself. But also they act as places where you can learn techniques and skills, how to become a cybercrime offender. But also from more kind of a sociological perspective, it's a place where norms are learned, distributed, disseminated, and you socialise, the sub-community within these cybercrime places, which you might learn about, who is appropriate to attack, who is not appropriate to attack, what is the norms in this field, and so on. So these are really, really fascinating places, which is one of the reasons why we collect the kind of data that Maria was talking about, because it's of interest to people across a wide area of different disciplines who have interesting questions that they can start unpacking with sub-data. So I'm going to be talking mainly about forums and marketplaces. Just a bit of an example. Have anyone heard of Anderson Pay? Knows? Yeah. So Anderson Pay was the username for the person who released Mirai source code. Mirai is malware that compromised IoT devices, things like webcams, and it was used as a DDoS botnet. So they would use default username and passwords in order to kind of install itself on the device, and that connectivity was used for kind of directing attacks. So Mirai was responsible for, at the time, the biggest DDoS attack, and they had DDoS Brian Krebs, I believe, who kind of identified, he's very good. If you don't follow his blog, you should do so. They decided to release the source code on hack forums. So hack forums is a live stream coverage underground community, and this enabled them to kind of remove themselves. They could have been anyone, because anyone's got the source code for that type of attack. So this is quite a famous post. It's when they're releasing that source code, and there's a few things that we'll be talking about as we go along. We can see We've got some details about analysing pay, their elite member. Here, we can see the prestige, the post, when they joined, their reputation, score, and so on. We can also see at the top that it's hack forums. The board that they're posted in is in hacks, exploits, and various discussions about hacking, booters, IRC bots, and zombies. Very likely to load up. So it gives you a bit of an introduction to what a forum post might look like. A post will have create a thread. You get people responding to this and so on. There's also marketplaces, so crypto markets. Often these are for services. Probably the most famous is Silk Road. You might be familiar with Ross Ulbricht, who was convicted, since being pardoned, I believe, for running Silk Road. A lot of these sell drugs, various drugs, but also you can buy other things. I've done some work on airline ticketing fraud. So this is somebody advertising travel agencies on these sites, so you can buy fraudulently obtained airline tickets very, very cheaply. Or here's somebody advertising access to frequent flyer accounts, British Airways, and these are used for the travel fraud to enable that amongst things like credit card fraud. Talk about credit card fraud, there's carding shops, and here you can see an example of perhaps the user interface for this. It's got the BIN, so the bank identification number, the type of card, the name, the country, city, what other data comes with that card if you buy it. So, for example, the phone number of the card holder, the mailing address, the date of birth, and also the price of the card. So you could, just select which card you'd like to buy, and you can then, have it automatically through a shop interface added to your account on those credit cards. Let's see. What else we've got here? Yeah, great. You can buy things like guns. This is a user interface for a booter service. So I mentioned booter services before. These allow you to order denial of service attacks. You need to put your IP address in, and you can have a subscription to a booter service. They range from free test accounts up to several $100s a month, but usually as low as about $5 a month. These are often used for online gaming to knock your opponent off because they're very short attacks, but you've got your opponent's IP address. It allows you to knock them off their TeamSpeak server or off their home internet connection. Also things like malware are available marketplaces as well. This is interesting. This is a currency exchange, so you can buy and sell alternative currencies on these platforms. This is some analysis we did on hack forums. So you can see here the red, so the solid line is the currency that you have, and the dotted line is the currency that people would exchange that for. So there's some interesting kind of trends we can see here. First of all, green is Liberty Reserve. Does anyone know what Liberty Reserve was? Yeah, everybody of course knows. Liberty Reserve was an alternative e-currency. It was used a lot for money laundering and for criminal enterprises, and so it was actually taken down by the US for money laundering in 2013. And what was really interesting, what we can see from this data is, so of course, trade in Liberty Reserve goes to zero, but then it also coincides with a short time later, an increase in Bitcoin being traded as a currency. There was some beforehand, but you can see, so we're not quite sure, is this displacement from Liberty Reserve to Bitcoin, or does this just coincide with the increase in the popularity of Bitcoin at that time, or is that increase somehow also linked to Liberty Reserve maybe no longer being used because it was a very, very popular currency, alternative currency at the time. We can also see, for example, that despite the big increases in Liberty Reserve and Bitcoin, that PayPal is the most commonly traded currency. So this is often used within underground communities. It's a way to perhaps get payments from victims or to move money around between people who are collaborating together. but it's or to buy criminal services, things like the DDoS attacks. But it's something that people often then are trying to exchange for other currencies very, very frequently because they can't necessarily cash out. There's different types of PayPal accounts you can have, and if you have one that is linked to your bank account, so you can transfer money to your bank account, that is then linked to your identification. But if you have a more ephemeral PayPal account, then you can basically operate that anonymously with an email address. So yeah, so it shows us some interesting kind of patterns over time with this. Oh, another thing is that we can then see around 2014-15 that Amazon gift cards become popular, and this has very much increased as well over time. Amazon gift cards, similar to PayPal, are used as an alternative currency because it's a commodity and you can trade it. Yeah, people will exchange it and take a cut of the value of that. Okay, so these cybercrime places can exist in various ways. We often don't usually see like compromised sites being used because you need to have some kind of long-term access to that. So usually we see it as a registered domain or as, say, a hidden service on an anonymity site such as Tor. So a Tor site will have a random character. I can't remember how many it is for Tor. It's like 36 now or something, followed by .onion. But you can see it's not really recognized to the site that you're visiting. This is going to be relevant as we go along as well. So the other option is to have a registered domain. Now this does mean that first of all, law enforcement can identify where you're being hosted and potentially have your site taken down, or you could have your domain name deregistered or not being complying with terms of use for facilitating immigration. So for these type of places, it's often a bit of a balancing act in terms of relying on kind of freedom of speech in order to stay up and having, in many cases, we'll have forum rules that will help maintain their longevity. You say, oh, but that, you get somebody complains that, well, that's against our terms of service, we can remove that account, and they'll keep people happy in order to stay offline. This is really interesting for us in terms of collecting data because it's much easier for us to collect data from hidden services because they don't know your IP addresses. But places like cat forums very much against being scraped, and so they will block any IP address that is from like a university or from, Cambridge can't really access the data from students, but not so much for me, or from law enforcement or from known security researchers, for example. So there's a lot of effort sometimes there's going to keeping our scrapers active. Okay, so some of this on the open web. A lot of it is on the open web, a little bit's on hidden services as well. So I'm going to talk to you now about, giving you a bit of introduction about cyber places. I'm going to talk to you about trust. As I mentioned, trust is really important issues within their spaces. We're going to explore some of the reasons why market and forum actors should not necessarily trust each other, right? Why would you want to trust these people? Now, one of the reasons why not is because some of them are rippers. So a ripper is a way of describing a scammer, except it's a scammer who scams other scammers. So a ripper might do things like obtain payment from you, but then not provide you with the goods and services that you thought you were getting. You send money for credit cards, but you don't get credit cards in return. Or it might be that they sell the same thing to multiple buyers. So you might buy credit cards, but Maria might go and buy credit cards as well, and she gets the same credit card data. Now, this is a problem when it comes to actually trying to monetize that credit card data, because if Maria's trying to cash out, she's trying to use it, then it's more likely that those cards are going to get blocked. And so the data becomes pretty much worthless. Or they could do something like provide a lesser quality product. You thought you were buying some fully undetectable malware, but actually all the antivirus have the signatures, and it's pretty much worthless. So there's all of these reasons why it's kind of problematic with trusting each other. I've got an image there of Pinky in the Brain to remind me to tell you about Mr. Brain. Has anyone heard about Mr. Brain? Not Mr. Brain. Mr. Brain. Okay, so Mr. Brain was a phishing kit group that was operating out of Morocco. So they would create phishing kits that were used by other people doing phishing. So it would help them kind of automate setting up a phishing page. You get a compromised host, you can get it set up, minimize all of the kind of technical aspect of that. And it's it's all the kind of code that you just have to get it running. That's all working for you. So that was great. It lowers the barrier to entry for other people doing phishing. It makes it much easier. They're provided for free. Yay! Who doesn't like free things? Now, what was interesting is that Mr. Brain was actually quite clever. So by these free phishing kits, what people using this did not know was that they backdoor. So the compromised credentials, and this is often the difficult part, like actually getting people to click on that phishing email to enter their credentials. So the people who are using the phishing kit are doing that part of the business, and the credentials will get sent to them when they were able to get victims to enter them. But the data was also sent to Mr. Brain. So Mr. Brain was basically able to outsource the difficult part of getting people to actually click on these links, and it just had all this data coming to them for the provision of phishing kits. So that things like backdoors can actually be another way that people can rip off others, even though it's provided for free. They're kind of undermining that trust. Now, one of the issues, of course, is if you get ripped off, I'm not necessarily going to go to the police and go, hey, Marie didn't send me the credit cards that you're supposed to send me. I think you should go and have a chat with her. They go, really? Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Why don't you come this way, sit down and tell me a little bit more about that? So you don't really have formal adjudication. There will be some adjudication, there'll be some moderation or keeping on platforms. And the reason why that is, I'll get into it as I go along. But you don't really have any kind of, if you get ripped off, it's very difficult to talk about it. And one of the reasons for this is anonymity. So you don't know who the other person is. I don't know that it's Marie who's selling me those credit cards. It could be anyone. And this is one of the reasons why we don't believe that organised crime groups are really, that's what traditional kind of market organised crime groups are really so active in these spaces, because the way that they operate is through governance. So they operate through fear and control. So it's like, you piss off the grandfather, the godfather, you're going to end up with concrete roots. And so you can't really do that if you don't know who that person who ripped off the godfather is. The ability to take informal action, so rather than going to police, going through the criminal justice system, that's available to you is to take informal control, which is what happens with organized crime groups, with gangs and so on. That's not necessarily available to you in online anonymous spaces where you don't know who each other are. Okay, so that's some reasons why you might not want to trust the other people on the platforms. Let's think about why you might want to trust the platforms themselves. So why actors should not trust marketplaces and forums. So has anyone familiar with the term lemon market? Yeah, a couple of people. All right. So Apolos has awarded the Nobel Prize for this idea of information symmetry. So the idea is that buyers and sellers have got different information about the quality of products. Marie might know if that card data has been sold to multiple people, but I, as a buyer, I might not know that. So a lemon market is going to be when the buyers are unable to differentiate between good quality products and bad quality products. They're not going to be willing to pay top dollar for a product that might end up being a bad quality product. So if there's no way to differentiate that, what this means is that good quality sellers who can't get top dollar are going to exit the market. They're going to go and sell the cars, or their, the idea of a lemon relates to cars. They're going to go sell the cars in a different market, go to another town, or in relation to stolen cards or stolen data or cybercrime go to a different marketplace, to a marketplace that doesn't have rippers, where buyers don't have that level of uncertainty. So we do believe that this happens within cybercrime markets, that a lot of them are in the market. So Hurley and Florencio kind of question, why would people buy things like a credit card for as little as, say, 50 cents in some markets if they claim the asset is worth $2,000? You know, why aren't they just kind of using to cash that out to $2,000 themselves? And so their claim is that solid data markets are essentially lemon markets, that rippers are imposing a tax on every transaction that takes place, and that the benefits that are often touted within the benefits to offenders, I should say, the amount that people are actually gaining from credit card fraud, for example, are being over-exaggerated from the security industry that are trying to get people to buy their products. Now, another reason you might not want to trust the market itself is because, remember how I showed you an onion address with a lot of different characters followed by the onion? Sometimes you just don't know where that's ended up. You might think it's the marketplace you're going to, but it's not necessarily going to be. So this is a login page, reportedly for Alpha Bay, which is actually a phishing page set up by somebody who was phishing Alpha Bay traders. So what they'll do is they would send a message to traders on Alpha Bay and say, you know, something wrong with your account, you need to log in, you need to reset your password. They would be given the URL to do that, and it was actually to their phishing page, and they were able to harvest the credentials and then take over their account, siphon off their or change their cryptocurrency addresses, or if they had money in escrow. So yeah, you don't necessarily know because it's not a recognizable domain or URL where that phishing link is pointing to. Now, another reason is because there has been a long history of marketplaces doing what are called exit scams. So an exit scam is when the marketplace will hold on to money that is being held in escrow. So escrow is a way of being able to have a bit more certainty when it comes to making transactions. If I buy cards from Marie, I might give money to escrow service provider who is Marilyn. When I say I've received the cards, Marilyn can give me to Marie. But what Marilyn can do is hold on to that escrow for a couple of days, a week, whatever, and not release it to Marie, and then just close the marketplace and take off. And so this is this has been known to happen. Some of the biggest ones are Evolution, 12 million after the year operating, and Wall Street Market, 14.2 million. Now these are, of course, Bitcoin values. I think at the time that the escrow was, but the value of that has really increased even more. So you can see it'd be very, very tempting if you're operating with these marketplaces to do something like this. Okay, now another reason you might not necessarily trust in marketplaces is sometimes they might not be operated by who you think they are. So the earliest example of a marketplace being operated by law enforcement that I'm aware of is Dark Market, which is back in 2008. Some FBI agents actually were able to infiltrate the marketplace, gain the trust of the administrator, get added as a moderator, and eventually also being an administrator. They ended up hosting Dark Market in a service in Pittsburgh, which was quite an interesting thing. So they, if it's a crypto market, if you go and seize the server, everything's encrypted, so you don't necessarily have all of the data. But if you're actually administrating the server, then you've got everything, right? So it's quite an interesting approach. There was also, almost 10 years later, a very interesting Okay, so I'll show you a little bit of an excerpt from a media release relating to this. Now, as I go through and find the right place to pause at, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. So this media release happened.
The dark web.
I'm not sure how the audio is going to go. I didn't think about that.
I'd like to specifically thank the
Can people hear that at the back? Oh. Oh. If that works. Oh, no. It seemed to be okay in terms of coming through my laptop. We'll see. Yeah. It's not unmuting. So Alphabet went down. Nobody knew. People thought it was an exit scam. Somebody contacted one of my colleagues and was like, "You've got to go log in to CE's Department of Justice press release." So you can see the step sessions there. I'm following on because it's like 18 minutes of like really boring, how much drugs there was on there, the scourge it was on the internet, blah, 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 blah. That was that for 18 minutes. And then something really interesting happened. So
pursue these attempting to hide behind the anonymity of the dark web. I'd like to specifically thank the dedicated men and women of the DEA and our partner law enforcement agencies for their incredible work on this particular operation, and to many federal prosecutors who work tirelessly every day to bring these criminals to justice to protect our citizens. And with that, I'd like to introduce Europol Director Rob Markham.
Thank you very much. And I'm the final speaker, so we'll hold your attention just for a few minutes more, if I may. Thank you to the Attorney General and colleagues of the DOJ for inviting me to be part of this event today. And we're very pleased at Europol to have played our part in coordinating the international dimensions of this groundbreaking operation, especially in Europe. As you've heard, this outstanding law enforcement action here in the United States to bring to an end Alphabet was coordinated with simultaneous action in Europe against another major criminal marketplace known as the Hansa market. The shutting down of that, the Dutch authorities are announcing right now in the Netherlands at their own press conference. These two cases have been developed together, and our joint hit on both of these dark marketplaces is one of the most sophisticated law enforcement operations against cybercrime that we've ever seen. So the scale speaks for itself. You've heard the figures already, but Alphabet and Hansa between them were the two of the top three criminal marketplaces on the dark web, trading hundreds of thousands of illicit commodities, drugs, and many others, the details of which you've already heard about. That's 40,000 vendors, depending on the marketplaces, to sell everything from fentanyl to illegal firearms and malware for cybercrime attacks. So their coordinated takedown has, I think, punched a big hole in the operating ability of drug traffickers and other serious criminals around the world. But what made this operation really special was the strategy we ran to magnify the disruptive impact of the joint actions. Between Europol, the FBI, DEA, and the Dutch police, the team play that we ran here was to take covert control of the Hansa market under Dutch judicial authority a month ago, which allowed us to monitor the activities, criminal activities of users without their knowledge, and then shut down Alphabet during the same period. So what this meant in particular was that we could identify and disrupt the regular criminal activity that was happening on Hansa market, but then also sweep up all those new users that were displaced from Alpha Bay and looking for a new trading platform for their criminal activities. And in fact, they flocked to Hansa in their droves. We recorded an 8 times increase in the number of new users on Hansa immediately following the takedown of Alpha Bay. And since the undercover operation to take over Hansa Market by the Dutch police, the usernames and passwords of thousands of buyers and sellers of illicit commodities have been identified and are the subject of follow-up investigations by Europol and our partner agencies. So as a law enforcement strategy, therefore, leveraging the combined...
So if you didn't get it, because I realised the volume might be a little bit low, the Dutch police took over Hansa Market. They were operating the marketplace. They were administrating servers. They were able to, you have access on all of the activity that's going there, but it's out of 3 top marketplaces, right? So at the same time, they're talking with the FBI, who have been able to take over, or they were able to identify where Alpha Bay was being hosted, who was administrating, and they were able to arrest them. And they made it look like there was no announcement to begin with. It made it kind of look like it was an exit scandal until this press release happened. And you could almost hear like screaming on the internet because all these people who had moved from Alpha Bay to Hansa Market and had set up accounts and moved all their trading over there, buying things there, all of their details now come from, as well as existing users who are already on there. So they were able to really magnify the impact that they had. So yeah, it's just a really interesting case study of when law enforcement actually work together and they like look at the infrastructural aspects of what's happening, they actually can make an interesting difference. And there's been quite a lot of drug-related prosecutions that have happened from that Hansa Market operation. So I've given you some reasons why you not want to trust other actors on those marketplaces. I've also given you some reasons why you might not necessarily want to trust the marketplace themselves, right? Not a great start, but cybercrime still persists, and these marketplaces form right. So how is this possible? Like, what are actually the mechanisms that enable trust to persist? So I mentioned before information asymmetry in the markets. A related theory to this is signaling theory. Is anyone like signaling theory? Now, signaling actually is very cross-disciplinary theory because it can apply to anything like make selection to trusting trustworthiness in untrusted communities. Now, when it comes to chronological aspects of signaling theory, the book to read is Code of the Underworld by Diego Gambetta. Really fascinating book, but he explains how criminals signal trustworthiness in untrustworthy physical environments. So things like how you move, how you talk, the tattoos that you have. These are all signals about I'm somebody that you can trust. I'm legitimately a bad guy. I'm not an undercover police officer, right? So untrustworthy actors, so things like undercover police officers, might try and mimic those signals. So a good signal is one that is cheap to omit for somebody who is a legitimate bad person, but costly to mimic. So things like gang tattoos, for example. If you're a police officer, you don't necessarily want to have a gang tattoo on your body that's going to make you have very good tattoo removal. It's going to be on almost the rest of your life. And it's very hard to explain to your family why you have So this is a good signal for people who are legitimately part of that gang because it's very costly to mimic in terms of being able to remove that and the cost to your social life. So this is where you see signals happening. If you start looking into this theory, you see it all the time. Like, how do people signal their credentials as an academic, all these signals that people look into. So we've always had some interesting discussions about signals in terms of like, if you're a PhD student, how do you signal yourself to potential employers that you are going to be a good postdoc or a good faculty hire. So it's interesting things to kind of look into signal theory. But let's have a look about how signals are used within everyday situations. So probably most people here are going to be using things like Amazon, eBay, online commerce sites, and signals are a really important aspect of how these sites, because again, you're dealing with people who are otherwise untrusted. So did anyone see any signals here? Anyone like to throw one out? Yes, you've got a product rating. Excellent. Good. Yes, you can see 99.3% positive feedback. We've got the amount of feedback, like the number of people who left feedback.
Next to the again.
Go next to, oh yeah, long time, yeah, thank you, yes. So there's the pricing is, well, yeah, that's another good signal. So there's other signals as well. So this is the same, you know, if I clicked on the hyphen shot for links there, it will take me through to this page here, and I've got a lot more data as well. So I've got, again, the details that the last 12 months, like 99.6% feedback, how long did they remember or hated, the positive, neutral, negative feedback over the last month, 6 months, 12 months. We've got it by the like how I describe it, communication, shipping time, shipping handling charges, number of ratings for each of these. So we've got some qualitative feedback. Thank you. Love your menu of items. Five-star review. And what they've purchased. We can also see gaming is that it's getting people to write the same feedback. We've got some, you can see their unique feedback and kind of feedback items they've provided other places. So we've got a lot of data here, or signals that we can use to decide that we're going to buy this gift from this player, this seller, or we're going to go somewhere else. You know, often if you're scrolling on Amazon and you'll see like 10 people selling related things, you might then start looking at the feedback and deciding who you're going to buy an item from. So reputation is a really, really important thing when it comes to online internet, and how that works. So what we see is very similar reputation systems being used on, this is from Alphabet, and I'm sorry, it's a little bit fuzzy. We can see here, positive, neutral, negative feedback. 97.1% positive feedback, a little bit less than on eBay, over 6,000 orders, the average value per order is US$. The feedback history, we've got feedback about how the label was written, how it was posted, there was a visual barrier, envelopes, easier to have a decoy item, it was vacuum packed and heat sealed, the return address, average layers of mother. You've also got the qualitative feedback, so fast return, great vendor, everything was perfect, vendor, fast delivery. The delivery time is all specified. And again, we've got some details about who's leaving feedback and the data as well. So you can see that they're taking the, you know, they're learning from places like Amazon, from like eBay, in order to provide this level of transparency, in order to help generate that trust that this is somebody who other people have trusted and not had a bad experience with, and therefore you might have a bad experience if you also do business with them as well. So another aspect is that they will actually, if you are doing bad things, you can be reprimanded, and that might mean that your reputation goes down, for example. So this is, in essence, he is the the administrator of platforms. Omni is like user number one, and anything Omni says happens. So this person has done something that's really annoyed Omni, and sees a warning from and being demoted from Uber. So there's different levels of users, Uber, elite and general users. So they've been demoted from Uber. and they can't regain that as well. Now, in order to do this, we need to have rules, and again, as I said, these rules will be used. They'll be used in order to point out when people say, "Oh, your site should get taken down off the internet because it's doing all this bad stuff," and they go, "Oh no, but our rules prohibit that. We'll take that user off, we'll block them, whatever, we'll unplug their account." Of course, I can just go and pay a new account. But they do actually have some rules that sometimes do get enforced, and particularly because they don't want to be seen as rip markets. If you rip people off, like the placing made value, then you won't be able to participate in there. No forum, no marketplace wants to be a place, another market that's the market. And I've already mentioned escrow services, but just to repeat, if you have an escrow service, and often these are provided by, say, a crypto market, it's kind of inbuilt platform. You can also use other escrow services as well, independent escrow service, and this can also enhance that trust. It does also kind of displace that trust, because when we heard there can be exit scams about the party escrow service, and they also just take off your money. But it is another way that you can have a little bit more certainty that if I don't get the credit cards off Marie, that she doesn't still get my money. Okay, so we've learned all these different ways that platforms try to enable us to persist on their marketplaces. But one of the problems is that you have to kind of already be trusted in order to get people to do business, right? So what about new actors? What if you're somebody who's just started on the marketplace and you want to do trade? How are you going to get people to trust you? So in economics, we have what's called the cold start problem. So you might be familiar with this, particularly if you've ever tried to apply for jobs. Why would somebody give you a job if you can't actually demonstrate that you're a good employee? And you can't demonstrate you're a good employee because nobody's going to give you a job. So this is also a conundrum faced by new actors who find that others don't want to trade with them because they don't have a reputation, and they cannot gain reputation and nobody will trade with them. So we are really interested in this problem. We've done a few different studies that have looked into how does trust actually emerge in these situations. And so what we found overall is that trust is developed over time with repeated interactions. And so areas that we've found that has kind of led to trust being established, including starting small, signaling trust through the use of argot, and also signaling trust through transparency. So let's dig into these studies. So this first one, the first study we did that looked into the cold start problem, we were looking at a new contract system being established on hack forums. So hack forums has a marketplace, and they had a lot of rippers on there. So they were like, we've got to solve this problem because people are going to stop trading on here. So what that is, they had a new reputation system that they set up. And this period here we call setup. This is when the contract system was put online, integrated into the forum, but it wasn't compulsory. You didn't have to use it in order to trade. Then we have the stable period here, and in this period, all trade that happened on hack forums had to go through the contract system. And then we have the COVID period, so we wanted to see like how things changed with the pandemic. So we were particularly interested when we were doing this analysis in how do people become trusted. So this is a 2-year period spanning those 3 years. So what we find, remember that graph I showed you with the cash out, the PayPal, Bitcoin and so on, the most common activity that is traded through this contract system is cash out services. So people exchanging different types of currency. And what we found was that cold starters typically begin with currency exchange. So they first engage in very low level exchanges. They might offer a very favorable exchange rate for very small amounts of money. So people will decide like is this somebody I can trust with larger payments, with more frequent payments over time. So those amounts and the and the frequency of trades increase as time goes on. But in order to get that first initial reputation, they do engage in low-level exchanges. What we also find is that overall there's a fairly high concentration with a few key actors within these marketplaces who are like the go-to people if you want to say do currency exchange. It's the same as like if you're on Amazon, right, and you're trying to decide, you know, am I going to buy this Donald Trump toilet paper from this trader or from that trader, and you're going to go with the one that already has a lot of people who've been buying and satisfied with that. It's a similar kind of thing. You've got a concentration in the marketplace because once you establish that reputation, you become a go-to person for that, then you just get more and more. So you have the high levels of concentration within these marketplaces. Now, another thing we looked at was another type of trust signal, which is Argo. Does anyone know what Argo means? So Argo, you do. Are you leaving it? It's similar. So the original meaning of Argo was actually slang, basically slang, specialized language within criminalized communities. So has anyone heard of Polari? Yep, okay. So when homosexuality was criminalised in the UK, Polari was a language that was used by the gay London community in order to signal their sexual preferences. And so you could have a conversation with somebody and they could slip in some Polari terms, and it's kind of like copy slang kind of thing. And if you're also within that kind of sub-community, then you would be able to pick up signal, but if you weren't, then you would see the person. Right? So Argo is it's a very special type of slang, but it's mainly used, the original meaning of Argo was language being used in criminalised communities. It has become a bit more widened in its use over time, but we're using it in terms of its original meaning. So what we, you know, in sometimes forums, there's a lot of what we might call elite speak. You're familiar with this? Some people like elite by L33T, that kind of stuff. So elite speak's a big thing, and there's a lot of technical terms, there's a lot of slang, and so this is a great way for people to signal trust. We wanted to see, is this used as a trust mechanism? Is this a way to signal trustworthiness and to gain that reputation? So when we look at this, we'll see a positive relationship between the Argo for post reputation score and also Argo for post, and then with contracts that they go through this contract system. Great, okay, that's good. So we want to look into this a bit deeper. And so we see that it's actually a bit more nuanced in the results. So we kind of divided up the users, those who are very fast involved, so less than 6 months active. And in fact, most users on these platforms are, you know, they're on there, like post once or twice, and then they disappear. That's quite a large proportion of users, but you do get people who are there for a lot longer. So these people who are active between 6 and 12 months, 12 months to 2 years, and over 2 years. And so this is a proportion of other post per month. We can see that, you know, it doesn't change too much in these groups, but here we've got two places using clustering. So we can see this group here represents 11% of that user group, and here 31% is orange group here, whose use of Argo actually decreases over time. That's really interesting. Let's look into this a little bit more. Okay, so what we find is that the group, the cluster that decreases in their use of Argo are actually the most active and the most highly reputed amongst the group. So here we're looking at the orange ones again. Post months are very active. They've got a lot of Argo initially, and then it reduces this per month, and this is per post per month. And they're the most highly reputed here. So it's really interesting that Argo starts with really high and then it reduces. So what we believe is happening here is that they're using Argo to overcome. So once they establish that reputation, they don't have to use it anymore. The other reputation metrics are taken over. They have built up their reputation. They're known. They're that go-to person if you're looking for that thing that they specialise in. So what you're wondering about is this because Argo involves a high level of cognitive effort? You have to think about how you're typing, how you're presenting, and once you're on your computer, it's like, whatever, back it about, and people trade money coming in. So yeah, we believe that Argo is being used as a signal, but it's not necessarily going to be a stable signal. It can reduce over time. And then another area is transparency. So one of the unique things that this new contract system brought in is that they had two types of contracts. You can open a public contract or a private contract. And a public contract meant that other people could see the details of that transaction, like what you were buying, how much it was, if it was completed, and so on. I think it was all, the completion details are still available as private. But so we'll come back, well, how do people decide if their contract is going to be public or private? Because if it's public, it's great in order to increase transparency because it increases the level of trust. But if it's private, it helps protect you because you're doing illegal things here and perhaps you don't want other people to be able to get data. So what we have here is the level of transparency, so the level of trust, level of experience, between the buyer and seller. So blue line, the buyer's got low levels of trust or reputation, seller's got low, and they're more likely to have public contracts, through to the buyer having low levels of reputation and the seller having high levels of reputation, through to the buyer behind the seller being low, and both being high. You can see that it's got the lowest proportion of contracts overall. So what we believe is as users accumulate credibility, as they move from being low levels of trust and they move into one of the other groups here, then they're less likely to have public contracts and their level of transparency decreases. So transparency is another way that people can overcome that cold start problem over time. Okay, so we've looked at subprime places, we've looked at why you might want to not trust other people in those places, why you might not want to trust places themselves, how trust persists. Let's look at how trust can be gained. We know how you kind of establish trust, but there's various ways that people can gain trust. You can set up a whole lot of proxy accounts and just give yourself a good reputation. You can buy reputation from people, pay them to give you a good review, that kind of stuff. We know the patterns scale across different commerce sites as well. There's some other really interesting ways that trust is gained. So often you might be familiar when you're buying things, there's a lot of small print that you might want to read through. The same thing with buying something online. You might have these signals of trust and things like guarantees. Like if you buy credit cards and they don't work, that's fine, I give you your money back. So this is like if you buy a car, it's like, if your car breaks down, it's like the first time I ever bought a car, I was 16, it broke down on the highway when I went home. And the second-hand car dealer I bought it from was a bit dodgy. He's like, no, it's not covering the warranty. So in Australia, by the way, so they do say mate there. I was able to say, look, that's a bit ridiculous. I just started home. You've got to, and he was fine in the end. But you do need to look very carefully at that small print. You might think it's covered under warranty, it might not be. So let's say I bought some credit cards from Marie. And Marie's like, if these credit cards don't work, don't worry, I'm going to give them my card. By the way, I know these cards are going to work because at the time that I send them to you, I'm going to check them and make sure they work. Okay, so this is a really interesting thing to do. So people who buy credit card data often buy it in bulk. So they might buy 100 credit cards, even 1,000. But the person selling them will go, okay, I want to make sure that I'm selling fresh, good card data. So I'm going to import all the card details that I'm about to sell you into a checker. It's going to go and make a transaction, and I can then prove that the card data is fresh. Right. Except that this kind of transaction where you've got hundreds of cards being checked is very, very suspicious. And either merchants can pick this up or the banks can pick this up. There's a very distinctive pattern in how these done. It might be like making a small donation on a charity site, for example. And so by the actual point of checking that card, you can actually kill the card. And when I go back to Marie and go, these cards, all the ones you've given me don't work, Marie can come back to me and go, well, they worked at the time I sold it to you. It must have been something you did. I'm not going to give you your money back. You must think you don't know what you're doing. So yeah, the small print can be a little bit misleading. Another one, I mentioned I've been doing work on airline ticketing fraud. This is really, really fascinating. They're real airline tickets, but they're being purchased, unfortunately, and sometimes the transaction gets picked up by the airlines or the travel agency, and the ticket gets cancelled, right? So if I'm buying an airline ticket through Maryland, who's offering a travel service on a dodgy underground market, very, very cheap tickets, and she says to me, look, I can guarantee that this is a real ticket. This is your reservation number. You can ring up the airline. You can confirm, or you can go onto the website and confirm this transaction has been made, that you have to report. And by the way, you have to do that and then bring escrow. I get my money. So I check that. Yes, my ticket's there. Fantastic. I say, okay, to it's escrow, the money goes to Maryland. Then I turn up to the airline, to the airport, and I get told, oh, I'm sorry, there seems to be a problem with your ticket. Do you have, it's been cancelled. Do you have another way that you can make that transaction? You have a credit card, you can buy a new ticket now, but that original book has been cancelled. You're probably very unlikely to actually have anything further than that, like be briefed by a police officer, for other reasons that I can go into another time, perhaps. Yeah, it will be kind of hidden in the fine print. Like, if you don't get your ticket, you get your money back. But by the time you realise that the ticket has been cancelled, by the time you turn up to the airport, it's too late. Okay, and of course, what this means is that reputation systems can be disrupted. There can be interventions put in place by law enforcement, people in industry, people who kind of work within these marketplaces doing brand protection and so on. So there's various ways you can then gain the reputation in order to make it look like this person is untrustworthy, even if it's not. So things like lemonizing the market, creating fake accounts and pretending to have bought something or even buying something and then leaving bad feedback, even if the product is genuine. The other area is through civil attacks. So you can actually create sellers in the marketplace, have other people pretend to trade with them, generate some positive feedback, when you get other people trying to buy things off you, you don't deliver, so then they give you bad feedback, and it makes the marketplace look like there's a whole lot of rivers there, when it's just these kind of fictitious actors. And then also you can do things like highlight real perceived insecurities. A lot of these kind of forums, there's a lot of paranoia. You kind of feed into that potentially. So, I talked about this brain, the idea of backdooring, about the capabilities of organisations or agencies, what they could do or not do, or other ways that people might be made to just feel a little bit more paranoid and less likely to trade on that particular place. Like, oh, that user went offline for a while ago and now they've just reappeared. Like, maybe he's been taken over by the feds. Don't trust him, that kind of stuff. Okay, so hopefully, oh, I've just realized I've gone way over time. I'm so sorry, but hopefully that's been interesting. If you're interested in what we do at the Cybercrime Centre, look at the webpage there. As Marie very nicely put it, we collect data at scale, share with academic researchers. We have lots of data sharing agreements in place already with UCL, so customers who are using our data, but UCL are now quite used to going through the data sharing agreements, and we seeing really good research come out from that. But does anyone have any questions? I'm so sorry about that.
You said some of these marketplaces learn from that. I was wondering what were the trust mechanisms like before that, or they developed the review systems?
So I think the oldest criminal I can aware of is Silk Road. I'm pretty sure eBay was released before Silk Road, so yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
So it's always been review based, star based.
Yeah, reputation is. I mean, think about when you order a food, right? Have you seen like the signal get matched? You know where your driver is, you know what the rating is, and how many they're driving for, the name is, all this kind of stuff. So reputation is the spaces, like online spaces, where you're dealing with people who are like anonymous to you, are really important in order to get people to use that. So I think that we sometimes not consciously looking at it, not consciously realizing that what we're looking at is a signal of them. But if you start looking for those, you see them there.
You were saying about that study that showed using the algorithm to get into to build reliability in the space. Is there anything that suggests that that can actually backfire? Because then would algo become a signifier of overuse? So if people who are more reliable and have other metrics have reduced use of algorithm inputs, but that becomes a signifier, like if you're using it then kill you or not that great, like, or is there anything to see if there's an offset between how reliable a person is versus
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I could almost say that people do like some lab-based studies and actually have like you interacting with people and you're looking to buy some malware, like who you're going to buy it from, that kind of stuff. So that might be a way to look into that. But often people disappear, and it might be because people don't trust them, or it might be because they've got a girlfriend, or it might be that, another millions of reasons to why they're not around anymore. It's really difficult to then say because I use an algo that maybe them and they didn't persist. But yeah, interesting question. I don't have an answer to that though.
I was actually recently at a talk from Daniel, who's also on your picture, and he was talking about Booter systems and such. And one of the points he made is like it's almost like when you try to take down one, like two come back and so on and so forth. I was wondering, like, what are your mechanisms to counteract this sort of multiplication of platforms? And you mentioned about gaming trust. Are you using some of those techniques to prevent being successful?
We're not using those things. We're purely with this. What's interesting though is you talk about takedowns. Nicholas Christensen, so from this relationship with the market. So after Silk Road taking down most groups that we can work on the Silk Road, and then how the market kind of fragmented, and many other marketplaces came up, and then you have situations with Alpha Bay where you have like 3 competing top ones. So yeah, this is really interesting stuff there. What we see with the forums is they do tend to be more stable, I'd say. Like hack forums have been running 20 years. With the market, they do tend to see passing the exit scams, or they get taken down, they go and figure out what being hosted, and it's like drugs. So there's a lot of pressure for people to take action against those sites. But yeah, I think we'll answer the question.
I mean, just forums, for instance, there's no sort of, they just go on forever, like hack forums, you said.
Yeah, I mean, Hackforms is interesting. Mainly because I have managed to stay online so long. I do know people at booters, first people with booting booters. So a lot of the booter services used to advertise on hack forums, and then I have one called stress tests. And FBI agent who I've worked with for 10 years, he actually contacted the administrator and was like, if you don't get this form taken off, I'm going to get excited. And the next day it was gone. And we were then able to see the impact of that on the DDoS attacks that were happening. And that was actually the biggest impact in terms of reduction in the number of attacks and also duration of that reduction as well. So it was very significant. So then it became interesting, how do people advertise to their customers when the site is taking down the revenue site is and still sitting with places like Telegram, Discord, or have meetings on there, and then the site is taking down. And so, well, if it's up a new site, disciplinary, you can find this there. Yeah. Yeah, I've been working with Dan on this for a long time now.
Yeah.
So. No. Yeah.
We kind of showed a picture of the use case we try to replication. And one thing you can see that the seller
so this is the Argo. So no, we're just looking at the seller, or actually the user, and
because what I'm saying, I can get the same action. So there was some yeah.
Yeah, I think the Argo, we're looking at the number of contracts, we're looking at the number of posts and their reputation score. So yeah, this one here. So this is the number of posts, the Argo per post, and cumulative reputation. So it wasn't about whether they'll buy some others, like if you on the retail industry on that site for years. But the increasing interesting analysis done at the
Yeah, I say we
yeah, I mean, they're not always active on the forum contemporaneously. So, this is over a 2-year period, but we just normalize it to month 0, and it's over 20 years. So you could have people who are active at various points, but yeah.
Secondary channel. So you looks like if the dating system is like as a seizure, is there any indication of people trying to reinstate the reputation where they just fall smart from scratch?
So, and you start the boosters, right? So the boosters are interesting because when they got taken off platforms, they found it very difficult to find a new home. And so this led to some interesting inventions. So if you want to find a food service, you might not necessarily go to platforms and because you're not advertising. But you can just search in Google for a food service, and food services will advertise using Google advertising to get people to land on their food service first. Now, the interesting thing is that the NCA were like, this is interesting. How about we buy some advertising space and say, did you know that another service acts are illegal and we will prosecute you if we find you? And cheating is bad. And they had all these kind of messages. So we were actually transitioning because we were analysing at this time a lot of work that the NCA were doing on takedown food services. And we were talking with the NCA and they mentioned this to us, and like, can you tell us like the dates that you were rented? So they were selling and said, and then our credit card expired. So this is the date the advertising stopped. So we had the exact period the advertising was running. And we've got this in a nice graph in our papers where you can actually, we use the US as a comparison. You can see in the US the number of denial of service attacks continually increases. In the UK, the number increases flatlines over this period that the NCA run in the advertisements, and then increases again once they stop advertising. And what we believe happened is that people who already have an account with food service, they're not searching for a new food service, they've got one. So they're not seeing these advertisements. But if you're a new user and you see these, then perhaps for some people, it did actually have a deterrent effect that they, and I'll say also that they, these advertisements weren't linked to everyone, but it was usually using profiles, right? So, young, going to be man, within this age group, coming from the UK hairdresser to get into this advertisement. And so we believe it had a suppression into the market. New users, but not necessarily existing users, which is why I see that line on the increase. So yeah, you won't necessarily find these fooders on these platforms advertising there, but maybe you can find like a Google search. I believe Google now has a lot of pressure to deprioritize the search results and to remove them from search results. So nowadays, if you search for food service, you have more likely to see a lot of blog posts about food services without actually an advertisement for them. But right, it's simply the NCA effort.
But we'll see how long that sticks. People deprioritizes things, it usually gets reversed to get better, of course. So, yeah.